Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Crowley,
And I'm Mike Smith.
and this is The Murder Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 58 of The Murder Project. This is going to be the debrief episode for the Hruby family tragedy. In this episode, we are going to be talking about a lot of different elements to this case, and we're going to be going over a lot of different things that involve the Hruby family. Now, if you are new to the Murder Project, the debrief episode is where I sit down with my best bud, Mike Smith, and we discuss all of our cases further. In this episode, it's going to be a little bit different because when we came back, I wanted to stay truer to form as far as the podcast go, and I did about a 20-minute episode on the Hruby family. Now, in my judgment of the case, I thought, well, I'm not going to get a ton of information on the case. I just want a basic outline as to what happened in the case, and then I would pick up from there when Mike got here, because I know myself, and I know that I will talk too much if I know too much. So what we did was we did the first episode. I later got on to confirm some different things in that episode, and I found out that the news article that I read was possibly speculation or possibly mostly fabricated. Some of the facts were true and correct. Some of them were not correct. So as a good faith measure to you guys, if you listen to that episode, I apologize for any information that could have been wrong. I did not do that on purpose. If you haven't listened to that episode, no worries, because it is now gone. We are removing that episode because I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea about what we're doing on this show. So we are going to pick up and we're going to do this episode basically from the start in a debrief episode. I apologize for any confusion if you listen to the other episode, but I can't go back and change that. All I can do is fix it from right here. So,
And it's unfortunate, but anybody that dives into true crime knows that when you're looking at these things, you could find 10 articles and they'd all be different, even though the facts of the case are supposed to be the same. So it happens. We'll actually reference that again here in a little bit because that's what I experienced for sure.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's get the episode started. Bringing it back. Mike Smith in the house, in my house, back again.
Back again. Wow. It's been so long. I actually got a little bit of a thrill hearing that sound effect.
I've been waiting anxiously to bust that out.
Yeah, I told my girlfriend about it, and she thought that it wasn't real, that we did that. And I'm like, no, we do.
The air horn?
The air horn.
Oh, yeah. I've got so many sound effects over here. Like, hey, everybody, welcome back to the show.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Hand applause. I love it.
I could do this. I won't, but I could literally do this all day. I have so many settings with different things on here that I can do. And like I said, I won't do it. Like I was mentioning that other episode that is no longer on the channel. I threw it up in the air.
That's so good.
It's gone.
Oh man, you got a 2-piece in that one.
Yeah, that's a double pump right there.
That is good.
So
I like the delay too, implying that you racked the shotgun. Very good.
Yeah. So I mean, that's it. That's the last one I'm going to do. I won't do any more on this episode.
I can't see what your hands are doing, but I'll be hearing.
Right? Yeah, you'll know. So
I'm ready to get into it because this case, I remember this, and most people will, because especially when you're talking about a whole family being killed, and then you learn what it's all about and what it's almost always about.
Yeah. And a lot of the information, as I mentioned, if you listen to the episode that we removed, a lot of the information was true. There were specific details that were not true. And so we're going to dive into that. But where this all took place in relation to where we live isn't too far away. So I also remember hearing about this and just thinking like, wow, somebody killed an entire family. And then you start to figure out the little pieces of it. And you're like, oh, it's a lot worse than what I thought it was going to be.
Way worse, yeah, and for the worst reason too. It's pointless.
It's terrible.
Senseless.
So we'll get into the actual details of the case. You have the the father and husband, John Hruby.
Mm-hmm.
You have the mother and wife, Joy Hruby, who also went by Tinker.
What a cute nickname.
Yeah, that's a small town kind of rural nickname, in my opinion. Like, just it's solid. I don't have any. I just go by my first name or last name.
Somehow it just makes it so much worse to know that her nickname was Tinker.
And what ends up happening to her.
Right.
Yeah. Then you have Katherine. She was John and Tinker's youngest child. She, from all accounts that I read, she was a well-rounded individual, a good student, smart, gifted athlete, very modest in the things that she did. Very different from John and Tinker's oldest son, Alan.
Yes. They are from a upper middle class neighborhood in Duncan, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And this took place in October of 2014 as we get into the details throughout. But yeah, the father and mother come from a generational business of a newspaper company, I believe, or a printing company.
Yeah. So John was a newspaper publisher, but not only that, but they were the owners of the newspaper company. And it was, like Mike said, it was multi-generational. And at one point they had sold one of the newspaper companies that they had owned, and they bought another newspaper company. So it's not the New York Times or something that you're thinking of like that. It's a smaller town. It's a smaller area. And as we talk about this, that's one of the things that we wanted to kind of point out. If you're living in, especially Oklahoma, they have Tulsa and they have Oklahoma City. Those are two of the bigger areas.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is kind of smaller compared to what you would think of as a big city. So one of the things that Mike and I were talking about before we started the show was this family, from all accounts, was doing well for themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Specifically well for the area that they lived in. So the example that I made was, if you make $150,000 a year, and let's go back to 2014, when your dollar is going to be stretched a little further.
Yep.
If you make $150,000 a year in Oklahoma, in the state of Oklahoma, and you don't live in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, that dollar is going to be, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah,
because
you're doing all right.
Yeah, the houses are cheaper, your property taxes are cheaper. If you make $150,000 and you live in New York City, we're looking at two different things.
You're broke.
Yeah, you're broke. So when we talk about the family and that they had money, they did, but it just depends on how you look at what the money was, how far that dollar goes, and what these people actually made. And so for the area that they lived in and what they did, they made good money.
Yeah. And for perspective, Oklahoma City is kind of central in Oklahoma. You go an hour and change south of that, you find Lawton. And if you go east of that, about 50 miles, maybe a little more, I couldn't tell directly, you find Duncan. Yeah.
Pretty close to Texas, that North Texas area.
For sure.
And we are going to go ahead and get into, as we discussed, the family that we're setting the stage for, basically Alan, because he is the general focus of this story. He was 18 years old at the time that all this happened. He was a freshman at OU. And because of the way that Alan was raised and the bit of income that they did have that might have put them above some of the other people, Alan loved to have a lavish lifestyle.
He did, yes. He thought himself very lofty and wanted to treat himself accordingly. Lots of spending, unnecessary spending. I read several quotes of people that knew him that he would often just go buy stuff on a whim. Just like that's what he did.
Just to do it.
Right, because he could. Which led to a lot of problems as well. He did not live inside his means, is what I was meaning to say. He constantly spent money, even to go so far as to commit crimes to possess that money, affecting his family greatly and himself. I mean, it twisted him into, like, he thought he deserved this lifestyle, and he would prove to the world that he would stop at nothing to try to attain it.
Yeah. So Alan had this idea that he had more money than he actually had, and he was not he had not accomplished anything in his life other than graduating high school and getting accepted into a university.
Right.
But for whatever reason, he wanted to show everybody that he had more money than he actually had. I don't know if it is because he is a sociopath or if it made him feel good to be the guy. Because if you listen to some of the stories that people said about him, he was very charismatic. He liked to be the life of the party.
Yeah.
His social media was interesting because he would always post pictures of watches and hotels and all of these different things that he did. And he even had his Facebook profile set to a public figure.
Yeah, I get the impression the more I read about him, the more I've read about him, that he really wanted to be a celebrity and embrace that lifestyle even when he couldn't afford it.
Yeah, but he didn't have anything, in my opinion, that would elevate him to that status. He wanted it so bad, but he also was missing the key components, which are you actually successful at something? What do you bring to the table?
Yeah, you're not famous. This is literally fake it till you make it. This is what he was trying to do. And that type, I mean, unless you're going to hit a lightning in a bottle scenario, you're not going to make it.
No, you're not going to be the guy.
Spend a lot of money trying to get there.
And so if you look at the way from 2014 to 2024, or let's say 2025 now, excuse me, he was maybe a little bit earlier in his time that, because that is literally all social media is now. It is people on social media posting all of their expensive trips and know-hows and buy my program for this, or check out this, or have you seen this? And he tried to do this in a way of, hey, check me out. I'm on this expensive vacation. Hey, look at this fancy watch I got. Hey, look, but nobody outside his own circle, nobody even knew who he was.
Right.
And so, like the lightning in the bottle, you're absolutely correct. He was hoping that somebody would see something and somehow it would elevate him to a status that...
Yeah, make him famous by portraying that he is famous. But it led to a lot of problems. He obviously had a significant spending issue that greatly affected his life and his family. He couldn't stop himself. And at one point, his family, they were constantly battling with him over his spending because he would be stealing from them. He would take his parents' credit cards, take cash, like anything that wasn't nailed down.
Yeah, any valuables that he could get. And one of the reasons that this happened was because of his family's success. He thought he should be at a certain status, but with the digital media age coming into full swing, the family's business in newspaper started to lose steam, as a lot of newspaper companies, especially smaller town newspaper.
Absolutely.
When you're actually just paper, you're not digital, and you're not able to make that transformation to the digital age, you were going to get left behind.
You're going to get nudged out.
Yep. And that happened to a lot of different places. And his family was trying to do what they could to not only save their company, but to counter it and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're not making as much money on newspaper. We're going to have to start cutting back.
Yeah, they downsized and tried to make it like a more functional but smaller business.
Right. So John, Tinker, and Katherine, they're all on board. They're like, hey, we got to start cutting back because we know that the business is struggling. And so if the business is struggling financially, we are going to be struggling financially because that is where we make our money from. Everybody got on board, but not Alan.
No.
He looked at it as they were trying to come after him and his lifestyle. And he did not care for that so much. And as Mike mentioned earlier, because of these things, he started doing a lot more irrational things that you can see as a pattern of where this is going to go.
Right.
He's starting to check some of these off. Now, in my opinion, the way that this all unfolded was crazy because normally you don't go, your crimes don't escalate in a way of this. It kind of progresses in a different avenue, or there is a little bit of kind of buffer in between where he's trying to figure out how to go to the next steps. But as Mike mentioned, he would actually steal from his family. He would steal from his friends. He would go outside of that and actually start borrowing money from people that he shouldn't borrow money from.
That'll come up again.
And it starts to get him in trouble. And the first time that he's, in my opinion, would be slapped with a reality. He steals his grandmother's credit card.
His grandmother's.
Yes, his own grandmother, her credit card. And he decides to take himself a trip to Paris.
Just an intercontinental trip on his grandma's dime.
Yeah.
Brutal.
And he, of course, logs all of this on his social media, showing how cool he is. And I think this is mainly for the social clubs and social groups that he hangs out with at college.
Wants to hang out with, for sure.
And the ones that he's trying to get to. And when he gets back, John had enough. And he was like, look, if we don't put an end to this, or if we don't start to try to put an end to this, where's it going to go? Unfortunately, not a great place. But John was making the efforts. He had already talked with the family, and they had already talked to Alan. And what does Alan do? He steals his grandmother's credit card, and he goes to Paris. So when Alan gets back, he's greeted by the police.
That's right. He gets prosecuted. And that's awesome. And I would recommend that to anybody that has an adult child that's treating their family like that. You can try to help them, but after a certain limit, you got to take a professional measure. And that's what the police are for. He stole from her. What is that? Theft by check?
It's so
in Texas, that's what it would be. No, that's credit card fraud.
Yeah, credit card. Yeah.
Oh,
the actual charge, if it hasn't changed since we left, is debit credit card abuse.
Abuse, very good. That is it. Wow, rusty. There it is. There's my first one.
Yeah, and if you don't use it, you lose it. It's still tucked away a little bit back there for my case, but I think that's because I used to work in the booking room, and so I just used to see that charge come debit card abuse, and I put it in. But John decided that he was going to take action, and he called the police. He was arrested, and this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is Alan's first time to be prosecuted for a crime. So debit credit card abuse is a felony in Texas. I don't know if it is in Oklahoma. We have pretty similar laws.
We do, yeah. So it is always kind of safe to guess.
Yeah.
And is it also affected by the value, the totality of the value?
I believe so.
Okay, I think that might be true as well.
Yeah, if the higher it goes, the worse it is. But I think at the base level in Texas, it's a state jail felony. And so you would think to yourself, in the progression is state jail felony, third degree felony, second degree felony, first degree felony. But for this being Alan's first crime, he gets probation.
It's
pretty standard.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's not like anybody did him any favors. But
and it came with some restrictions. One specifically that will come up later is that he's not allowed to leave the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
That's a big one and pretty common.
Yep.
So you couldn't just run off and do whatever it is that people that do that do. And it restricted him greatly. And obviously, when you use the word escalation earlier, that's exactly what this is, because he felt more put in a corner than probably he ever had before. That we can speculate because of the actions that would follow.
Yeah. And when you start to add in the fact that John had his own son arrested, and most of us would think to ourselves, this is absolutely reasonable. Alan, on the other hand, did not feel that was the case. He actually took it very personal.
Oh, he was incensed. Yeah.
Yes. And this is also kind of a twofold deal where when you have Alan, he already burned his family. His immediate family.
That's right.
His mom, dad, sister. They're all put off with it. They're tired of it. Everybody's on board except for him. Then he moves outside. He takes grandma's credit card. He gets caught. He gets put on probation. So everybody that is close to him has tightened down. They put the screws to him. They're like, listen, we're all done with this.
Yeah.
And so now he has to start looking in other places.
That's right.
So this is where you're going to see Alan kind of shift into an area that is going to not only push him further to want to maintain this lifestyle, but how he's going to actually get the money.
That's right. And this is where my mistake earlier came in, because he ends up stealing a bunch of money from somebody through their checks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is that would be the mistake I made earlier, is that he did do that. It wasn't to his grandmother, though.
Right. So I believe the way that it's written out is it was actually a friend of his grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're talking about multiple grandmothers that are being victimized here. And what he did was he went over to a friend's grandmother's house,
mm-hmm.
and to thank her for getting him a graduation gift.
Wow.
And while he was over there, he happened to stumble across some banking information.
Yeah, you often can stumble across somebody's banking information, just bebopping around their house.
Yeah, just kind of cruising through their house.
No intent here, right?
Right. And so he ended up writing himself around $17,000 worth of checks.
Very casual.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And he would later have to pay for that, or he would have to answer for that, is what I was going to say. But when he's cut off from his family, he also starts ripping off his friends and borrowing money from them. And his friends are starting to realize that he doesn't have as much money as he claims he does.
Yeah, he's a buster for sure.
Yeah. He's been cut off by his family. His friends are starting to realize he doesn't have any money. And so he's starting to borrow money from people he doesn't even know. And that is by way of loan sharks.
Loan sharks, yeah.
And that's when you know you're getting into some pretty dicey territory.
For sure. If you have to borrow money from somebody who's going to give you like a crazy interest, or cliche wise, bust your kneecaps with a bat in a parking lot.
I was actually going to say, break your legs in a parking lot.
You have to.
Yeah.
We were born in the 80s, man.
Yeah,
we know all about it.
We know how the mob movies go. Okay, we know that you're going to get your kneecaps busted in a parking lot, and if that is the direction that you decide you're going to go in, it's probably a good idea to say that you have some sort of problem. And speaking of that, Alan was in a Shoppers Anonymous.
Oh yes, it was later told by one of his college roommate that he was part of Shoppers Anonymous, which probably a program that his family tried to help him get into because of his spending. He just couldn't stop himself.
Or a condition of his probation.
Could also be that. But yeah, he was in Shoppers Anonymous trying to get help. Clearly didn't take it very seriously. But he just couldn't stop himself. He in his mind, twisted as it would be later, he thought he deserved this lifestyle. He was destined to live like this.
Yeah.
Based on nothing.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that that really stuck out to me in this specific case. You have someone, as I mentioned before, but I really want to highlight it right now because it's just thinking about it, it irritates me. You have someone who has accomplished nothing.
That's right.
He's literally just stolen everything that he's had. He has damaged every relationship that he could possibly have.
Mm-hmm.
He is taking things that other people have worked for and passing it off as his own accomplishments, and he has zero. This amount of entitlement. And that's why I was also thinking he might be a sociopath, because Alan only cares about Alan.
That's right.
Alan doesn't care about anybody else that he hurts. And we're going to find out that he is pretty serious about not caring about who he hurts.
That's right, because he comes up with a plan that he thinks is going to help him score big, and that's clearly not what happens, especially if you're a moron.
Especially if you're not very bright. Now, he starts to think to himself, I'm going to have to eventually pay back this money that I have borrowed from people.
Mm-hmm. And you can assume, and from his own comments he'll make later, you're going to get pressure from a loan shark.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to give you a deadline. And then if you don't meet that deadline, you either get the kneecap treatment or your interest goes up.
Yep.
They want more money in return. And with that additional pressure, I mean, the walls are closing in on him.
Yeah. And if you're not familiar with the way that loan sharks loan money, as Mike said a second ago, high interest, but let's just give you an example. Let's say that you borrow, say, $10,000 from a loan shark, and that loan shark is going to give you a specified time as to when he or she expects to get their money back.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say you're saying, oh, I need $10,000 tonight.
Right.
And the loan shark says, okay, here's your $10,000. I want my $10,000 back by next Friday plus $3,000 on top of it.
That's right.
So next Friday, you owe me $13,000. And then they're going to call you on that next Friday. And if you don't have their money, now it's not only probably threats that are things that are going to happen to you if you don't return the money.
Mm-hmm.
Now you owe me 15.
That's right.
And if you try to counter and say, well, you originally told me that I owed you 13. And I needed my money by Friday. Friday's come and gone. Now you owe me 15.
You owe me 15 by next Friday.
Yeah. And if I don't get that, then here's what happens. And it never gets better.
No, it doesn't.
The conditions never get better.
It's just slightly worse than a check cashing place.
Yes.
where they get you.
Yeah. Whereas the check cashing place is legal. This is not. But a lot of people that have drug habits and gambling habits and things like that, this is where they have to finally resort to. These are the people that they have to come in contact with because they're in a position like Alan. They have used up any asset, any personal relationship that they had around them, and they have to go to they have to take a different avenue to get money. And it never, not that I've ever heard of. The movie The Gambler, I think, was a story where borrowing money from a loan shark actually worked out in his favor. But that's also a movie.
Yeah.
When you're talking about real life and you get into true crime episodes, it never usually works out for the person that's borrowing money from a loan shark.
Yeah, it's definitely stigmatized.
Yeah.
Or should be.
Yeah. It definitely should be. So when we get to this point in the story for Alan's life, he decides that he needs to perhaps find a way into money, perhaps hit the lottery, perhaps he's not going to go out and work. So maybe the life insurance lottery, maybe that's...
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that he was able to gather some type of insight as to what they were worth. Plus, also, his... the liquid assets of that would come from his family.
Mm-hmm.
He thought maybe that would help him strike it big. And his inheritance.
Yes.
That's a big one too. So a lot of the articles I read, that's what they talked about. Inheritance. Well, the other thing that you don't hear referenced a lot, but we did, is life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But to make that happen is going to require a little bit of murder.
Yeah. He thinks to himself, if he could get a hold of his inheritance, he could actually not only pay off his debts, but live this lifestyle that he's portraying. And the problem with someone like Alan is it's similar to the shows that they make about people who win the lottery and then they just fast forward a year later and they're homeless.
Right.
They have no plans.
There's no plans. No, he wants the immediate gratification of having a bunch of liquid cash and fancy pictures and watches and cars and ladies.
Yep. And if you've ever, speaking of movie references, if you ever watched the movie Casino, and at the end of it, is it Sharon Stone that plays in that role? Anyways,
so.
Yeah. So she gets the money, she gets the jewelry, she's got the Mercedes and the fur coats and all the stuff, but she didn't have a plan past that because she wasn't spending money on watches and fancy things. She had a drug problem. But the same thing holds true. Alan's mother and father had a successful business at one point. He did not have a successful business. No. Alan's parents had given him a good life and tried to help him out in ways that he could. He did nothing to get that. He's going to college. He's a freshman. He doesn't have a way to, once he gets this money, actually do anything with it to build a future.
No.
Like you said, he wants the instant gratification of being able to take this money and, in my opinion, hold up as much of it as he can.
That's right.
And be like, this is what I got. Y'all check out how much money. I just bought this car. I just got this clothes, this jewelry, but it's a flash in the pan.
That's right. He wanted to put himself on a pedestal. He wanted to idolize himself and the lifestyle that he was going for. And what he was willing to do to accomplish that is dark. And he hatches plan. I mean, he clearly has one, because he goes and, I believe, steals a 9mm pistol out of his father's truck.
Yes.
But knows exactly where it is and how it looks, so nobody realizes it's gone. Why would you have a reason to think it is? And he starts to plot, to make this plot. He's resolved to himself that he is going to try to remove the obstacle from his inheritance, between him and his inheritance. And we know by the actions that follows that he didn't even want to share it with his sister.
No, his sister was actually going to be another obstacle for him, because if he did receive his inheritance, he would have to split it with his sister.
That's right.
And he most definitely does not want to do that. And something that I want to touch on really quickly, as Mike said, that Alan went and got a pistol out of his dad's truck. Some of you guys, depending on where you live at, might think that that's a little strange. Around here, it is not.
It's not.
Now, I would suggest that no one leave a pistol in their truck, because, as Mike and I both know, being former law enforcement officers, your pistols get stolen out of trucks all the time.
All the time.
In vehicles.
It's a cliche around here.
Yes. Don't leave your firearms in your vehicles, but it's also not uncommon.
No.
In these parts.
No, any good old Okie boys probably got it.
Texas boy.
Texas or Okie boys. You got a collection of firearms that you could easily, that somebody who knows the household could easily find and have access to.
Yep. And I know personally from people I know that live in Texas, Oklahoma, even New Mexico, Louisiana, kind of this southern area. It is very commonplace for everybody to have a firearm, and most likely have one on their person or in their vehicle. I would just stress, take it out of your truck.
Take it in the home with you,
so it does not get stolen. So Alan shows up over at his parents' house. He, from what I understand, he knew that his father was not present at the house. So he was able to get into his truck, get the pistol, lock the truck back up, and leave.
That's right.
And he had already had this plan in place, but he wanted to make that separation where he went and got the pistol, he left, and I was kind of thinking that he might be, this is the time between the theft of the firearm to criminal activity, is maybe he was getting himself prepared mentally for what he was about to do.
I think so. Yeah, I think that is a big part of it, because he'd already resolved to his plan, which is what he's going to do. But now he needs to build up the nerve. And that's exactly what he does.
Yeah, he goes back to his parents' house. He walks into the house and he finds his mother sitting at the kitchen table, and he shoots his mother.
He executes her.
He executes his own mother sitting at the kitchen table. And from what the evidence shows, luckily for her, she probably didn't know that it happened.
Right. Yeah. From what I read, the gunshots hit her in the neck and in the head.
Yep. So unfortunately, she would be the only one who didn't know what was happening, because Katherine, Alan's sister, was outside and they believe she was washing her car.
Yeah.
And she heard the gunshots, might not have known that they were gunshots, but she heard something come from inside the house. So she comes into the house. She rounds the corner. Alan's standing there. She, based on the gunshot, she probably would have seen Alan. And he also executes her.
Yep. One shot to the head.
Shoots her straight in the head.
Kills his little sister.
So you have the mother and now the person that he was going to have to split his inheritance with. They are now checked off.
Yeah. And it's also important to point out that when he chose to cook this off, I believe it was the 9th of October, 2014, he chose a time when his father wouldn't be present.
Right. Because he had to get rid of his mother and his sister without having to deal with his father being there, because he must have thought to himself, if his dad was there, he might
fight back.
He might fight back.
Yeah, and that right there is such a damning evidence to his mental state.
Mm-hmm.
This is clearly something that he planned. He didn't want to have to encounter as few obstacles as possible. And eventually, John Hruby does come home.
Yeah, about an hour later.
So
he sits with his mother and his sister's corpses.
Yes,
for an hour.
Mm-hmm. No, fully knowing what he's done, remorselessly, and what he's about to do, because the last obstacle between him and his financial freedom, or so he perceives, walks in the door. Doesn't even make it that far into the house, I believe.
That's right.
And he executes his father as well. Again, a bullet striking the neck and the head. And after he does this, as part of the plan that we know he collects the recording from the home security system.
Yeah, because they have a home security system in the house, and he goes ahead and takes the hard drive for that.
Takes the hard drive and the pistol. And he leaves. He just dips. He's like, my work here is done. Now all I have to do is wait.
I have to wait for someone else to find them.
That's right.
Because I have to create an alibi for himself.
Right. He does.
And he thinks to himself that he's got a pretty rock solid alibi, because what he does is he leaves his family home where he's just executed his entire family.
Mm-hmm.
And he drives back to his dorm room, and he gathers up his roommate.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought there was another guy that went with that. Doesn't matter exactly, but part of creating his alibi for this scenario is that he is going to go to Dallas.
That's what's so funny about that. Dallas, Texas, for those of you that are wondering, in clear violation of his probationary restrictions.
Yes.
He can't leave the state of Oklahoma, but he does. And it's so crazy to me that he thinks that's wise, because that's pretty suspicious.
Mm-hmm. And I think that in that thought process of separating himself geographically, he's like, well, if I'm in Dallas, number one, a lot of people are going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be surveillance of me being in stores.
He stays at the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah.
No, pretty flashy joint.
And if you're thinking to yourself, well, how did he have money to stay at the Ritz-Carlton?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he stole his mom's credit card after he killed her.
Yep.
And went to Dallas. And he never even considered one time when he was cooking up this alibi that he wasn't supposed to leave the state of Oklahoma per his probation conditions.
That's right.
So he violates his probation in the process of trying to create his own alibi.
That's right.
And that's going to work against him as we start to piece together this last part of...
Right. So while he's having a heck of a time in Dallas, I believe there were pictures posted of his hotel room and some ladies and just him
all on his social media
living it up
while
he's just working so hard to create this alibi. It isn't until the 13th of October.
Right.
So 3 days later, so 3.5 days from the time of the incident, that the housekeeper for the Hrubys comes in to this murder scene. Now, I'm just going to add a little bit of a gross factor here. It's 3 days that these bodies have been sitting in room temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So this is pure nightmare material for this poor housekeeper.
Yes. Walking
into finding and smelling 3 decaying bodies in the home that she's there to clean, for people that she's probably worked for some time. I can't confirm how long she's been working there, but she probably knows these people to a certain degree.
So I listened to the 911 call that she made.
Oh, cool.
And she was very familiar with the Hruby family.
Oh, wow.
Who everybody was. She names them off. John, Joy, and Katherine are on the floor. They're not. I think they're dead. I'm kind of just going off memory here, but it's not exactly what she said. But she says, I think they're dead. Mm-hmm. They're cold. So she's probably obviously touched one of them.
Right.
And for her, and the way that it was described by one of the law enforcement officers that was there is it was extremely bloody.
Yeah.
And if you think about 3 people all bleeding out in the same room several days later,
yes,
whenever you actually find
lots of drainage,
there's going to be a lot happening there.
Yes.
And when I worked in law enforcement, there was a lot of trailer park areas around. We had an incident where there was a fellow that had died inside of his trailer. And we found him, I don't know, 4 or 5 days later or something like that during the middle of summer. And I can tell you that was the reason I bring this up is because it was one guy.
Yeah.
This was 3 people
Yes.
in the same room several days later that had all been killed and bled out in the same room. And so it was not only traumatizing for the law enforcement officers that had to go there and see this, but the poor housekeeper that showed up like she's bebopping through her regular day.
Yep.
She's like, I'm going to go in and clean the house. And then she walks in and
Murder scene. Yeah. It's horrible. That poor lady.
So I can't imagine what she went through. But the point of that was to say that you could tell in her voice that she was in absolute shock.
Yeah. That's so sad. I didn't listen to that. I guess I need to. That sounds horrific for anybody to experience. While that is going on, keep in mind that the person responsible for this and will later be caught is just having a grand old time spending his deceased parents' money in a state he's not supposed to be in.
And the cops are going to figure out pretty quickly that someone's missing.
That's right.
There's 4 people in this family. 3 of them are deceased. Where's the other one?
Yeah.
And this is standard. This is going to be standard police practice. They are going to start from the inside and start working out.
Circle. That's right. And statistically, that's who's most likely going to kill you is somebody in your smallest circle, your family or somebody close to you. And so they have to go. I think they have to go pick him up.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say after the murders happen and they talk to Alan, he tells them that he was in Dallas and he wasn't in the area. Now, for him, it's unfortunate because he set up his own arrest warrant.
He did.
Because the cops were very suspicious of what was going on, but they hadn't told Alan yet themselves what happened.
Right.
They were going to save that for later.
They're going to drop it like a bomb.
Yep. And so the cops are just in general asking. And they also have the evidence from his social media.
That's right.
Where he's in Dallas. So they get a warrant for his arrest for violating his probation.
Easy money.
They also now, if you guys remember us talking about that 17 grand he ripped off, they also now are going to question him about that as well. They're going to kind of do it as a bundle deal. They're going to hit him with the probation violation. They're going to tell him about the $17,000 they know that he stole. Then they're going to drop the fact that his whole family was murdered and get the reaction.
Yeah, and they get a reaction, one that I believe was referred to by one of the investigators as it seemed very fake.
Yes.
If you can imagine somebody, I believe the quote said, wailing and crying uncontrollably so badly that the cop was like, this is not real.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. And for those of you that have seen stuff like that, you know how silly it looks. And of course, like we always say, everybody grieves differently.
Right.
You don't know how you'll react to hearing something like that. But seeing this...
It is to a degree where the detectives are like, okay.
This guy's
okay, come on.
I mean, this is so fake. Yeah. Wrap it up.
This is our guy.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead and you want a soda or something? Let's go ahead and get this under control.
Yeah.
And
wailing uncontrollably.
We can really get to the brass tacks of this whole thing.
And they do pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I guess this is part of the plan that this genius never got far enough to plan was no matter what, he was going to have to talk to the police.
At some point.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You have to be. You can't think to yourself that your whole family is going to get murdered and you're not going to talk to the police. And if he figured out that he was going to have to talk to the police, you would think he had some sort of plan.
Yeah.
I got a great idea of what I'm going to tell the cops. And in his was, he was in Dallas.
Yeah.
And
that should be all you need to know.
yeah,
I wasn't here, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after they tell him that his family's been murdered, and he wails uncontrollably for a unknown amount of time before the cops finally are like, "Hey, dude, let's
get him calmed down."
Mm-hmm. And then he says, "Well, I obviously couldn't have done this. I was in Dallas." And what he doesn't realize or doesn't think about is that the timing of his alibi does not overlap the murders.
Right. Yeah. It happens after.
Yeah.
His alibi is pointless. An alibi, when you use the word alibi, it's supposed to be something that removes you from the equation.
Yes.
And by equation, I mean the timetable of the killings occurring. His alibi doesn't even come close to that.
No.
It all happens after. So he's basically just saying, like, I didn't do it because I left with my friends to go to Dallas. And they're like, yeah, but your family's murder occurred before all that.
Yeah.
And you're admitting to willingly violating your probation to get away. Also suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Where Alan probably saw that as a tool to prove how badly he was needed to get out of town. That's exactly what he proved, is that he needed to badly get out of town.
Yeah. And so his alibi doesn't overlap the actual crime.
Not even a little bit.
And then this is going to be, in my opinion, it's not going to take your most seasoned detective that's sitting in front of a guy that's on probation for stealing money, defrauding his family for money. They are currently investigating a case where he has stolen an additional $17,000 from someone else, defrauding them. Then he has his deceased mother's credit card on a shopping trip in a state he's not supposed to be in.
Yep.
And they're now dead.
Yes, and they're all dead. And nothing else was taken from the home minus the security recording. So,
and the cops noticed. I forgot to mention this earlier. The cops noticed that there was no forced entry on the house.
Exactly.
And so they thought to themselves that perhaps it was someone that was close to the family, or B, someone that gained enough trust from the family to open up the door, and this was a robbery that had gone wrong. Problem with that, is that nothing in the house was taken.
Nothing was taken
except for the hard drive.
And where somebody would have to know where it is, because if we're going to entertain that this was a stranger and not this moron Alan, they would have had to search for the hard drive.
Yep.
But this person didn't. So this, like you said, it wouldn't take a seasoned detective to know that this kid's checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
Not to mention that after his fit of wailing and crying and trying to put on his show, he seemed remorseless. He's quoted many times, because I read a dozen articles, and they all say that.
Yeah.
There are multiple witnesses, detectives, court goers, people that see him. He seems remorseless because in his mind, he didn't make a mistake. The only mistake he made was getting caught.
Yeah, I was about to say, the only thing he's upset about is the noose is tightening.
That's right.
On himself, because he thought that he was going to be able to get away with this. Right. I think, and I could be wrong.
You could be.
I mean, if you think about everything that happened here in the setup and everything, maybe he just hoped. Maybe he hoped he got away with it.
Yeah, in his mind, he thinks he would. But what I'm going to come back to something I mentioned earlier is he never thought he'd have to talk to a cop. And especially if you're a suspect, a police officer investigating a crime is going to speak to you differently.
Yeah. In
an interview and interrogation, they have tools to get past your defenses. It's created that way. You're trained that way. And Alan, never thought he'd have to do that. It's so unnerving to talk to people. And if you listen to the world of true crime, there's a lot of podcasts, people that talk about how this is a part where it can go good or bad.
One of two ways.
Right. Because there's a lot of a lot of cases where people are wrongfully accused of things. And it starts in the interview room where but the amount of pressure that these investigators can put on somebody especially if they think that you're the one who did it, is substantial. So much so that Alan is not prepared for this, and he cracks.
Now I understand what you're when you brought this up earlier. Now I understand what you're saying. You are saying that his alibi was his only line of defense.
Right. Yes.
He did not think further than that.
Yeah, I didn't. Like I said, we're rusty folks. I wasn't able to complete my thought there. Yes, he never thought he'd have to face that. A man or woman investigator staring at him saying, "Well, here's what I think happened." Bam, 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 bam. Go down the list of his timetable, and him have to keep it together and be like, "Still not me."
Yep.
But you're not prepared for that. Very few people are, and so he cracks.
Yeah,
and he confesses. Because you're not prepared for that pressure. Very few people are. You have to be a hardened person to deal with that type of interview and interrogation techniques. They're made to subvert you, to take away the way you've prepared to guard yourself mentally.
Yep.
And he couldn't handle it.
He could not keep it together long enough to. And when Mike's saying these interview techniques, it's telling the story, and then maybe I pick up from your story right in the middle, but then I tell you to go the other way.
That's right.
I'm like, wait, so you were in Dallas and you got to Dallas at this time and you left. Wait, what time did you leave again? Or I give you a time that you left that's different than what you told me. And then, as Mike mentioned, some people this goes extremely wrong for because they are actually innocent, and then they just start getting into agreeing with things that weren't true. But for Alan, as Mike mentioned, he's not able to hold up to any of the pressure, and he cracks, and he tells the cops, "Okay, I did kill my family, and I tossed the gun and the hard drive in a lake."
Right. They go search this lake. They find nothing. It is later found, though.
Yes.
Because after he left from murdering his folks, he went to a storage facility and left it, which the irony of this, maybe irony is not the right word, but his plan that he told the cops he did is better than what he actually did.
Yeah. He went to a storage unit that his grandmother owned.
That was his grandmother, yeah.
That nobody knew he had, or nobody knew he had access to. And he placed the gun and the hard drive there.
He kept them.
He kept it.
But the story he gives the cops after he confesses is that he threw them out.
It's better than what, like you said, it's better than what he actually did.
Yeah. So let's look at this in another reality. Let's say he did do it, but he didn't confess, and he did throw the hard drive and handgun in a lake.
They would have never found it.
They would, very unlikely, right?
Yeah.
Highly unlikely.
Very unlikely they would have found it.
And even if they did find it, you have to link it. That hard drive would be roasted.
I would assume that the hard drive would be no good.
But in the reality that we live in, poor, idiotic Alan didn't do. He kept it. But it's important to remember, folks, he already confessed.
And then lied about where he threw the evidence.
Yes. It sounds insane because, again, I'm bringing up, he's not prepared for this. The physical act of murdering his family was the easiest thing for him to do because he had no emotional connection, because they were an obstacle between what he truly emotionally wanted, which was wealth, power, and influence. And he thought he was going to get that. So he never planned for the scrutiny of having to be investigated. And he could not have done a worse job.
Yeah.
An absolute drip.
Yeah.
He did a bad job.
Yeah.
And lies. And they find it later and are able to have all this evidence, damning evidence other than the confession. And he's cooked.
Yeah, he's smoked. And when they get the hard drive and the pistol, because as Mike said, if the pistol is thrown into the lake, it's just going to come back registered to John.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have to figure out a way to link the murder weapon to Alan and where he got it from. And if Alan holds true to his guns and the hard drive is corrupted from water damage or whatever,
right,
you're going to have to go a different. Now, I understand there's probably going to be other forensic evidence in the house or what have you, but he had at least the story that he cooked up that he actually didn't do was better than what he actually did do. And then he confessed, still lied about it. Then they found the evidence. And then he came back and was like, so probably going to get the death penalty for that. Is there any way we can cut a deal here?
Yeah, but his initial plea is, I read, now again, there's many articles and a lot of them, but I read his first plea was not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
He confessed. I know it sounds crazy, right? For those who don't know how court or the criminal justice system works, what an insane thing to do. But to get that plea, he had to get the plea deal and get the death sentence taken off the table. He did have to eventually plead guilty. But with all the evidence they'd already collected, he still tried to enter a plea of not guilty.
Yeah. And he was smoked.
Smoked, yep.
Based on the whole evidence, he was smoked. And then, luckily for him, because I think if in this scenario, if absolute justice was served, he would have gotten the needle.
That's
but
right.
I also understand that death penalty trials are super expensive.
Yes.
And so if they can avoid the trial and the death sentence and the jury and everything and just say, listen, if you go back and tell us exactly what happened, we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to record. You're going to tell us everything. We'll take death penalty off the table. You're going to plead guilty. Him pleading guilty also removes any chance that he could later appeal any sort of conviction.
That's right.
When you're talking about death penalty cases, there is, and we've talked about them on the show, there is automatic appeals,
right,
that are going to go in place. It doesn't matter if you have the guy or girl dead to rights. Open and shut, death penalty case, automatic appeals. These appeals are going to drag out for, in some scenarios, a long time. Some shorter than others.
Right.
But avoiding all that with the guilty plea, taking it off the table, I think it's, a lot of people don't realize how much taxpayer money is saved. And I actually saw a spreadsheet one time.
Wow.
It is cheaper to put somebody on death, or it's cheaper to put somebody in prison for life and pay for that person every single year of their life than it is to put somebody on death row and go through all of those appeal process, because everything falls on the taxpayer dollar.
Wow.
And so that is what they opted to do in this scenario. They offered him a plea, take the death penalty off the table, but you cop to the whole thing. Tell us exactly what happened. And in that process, they took his ability to appeal that case off the table. So he just goes to prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole.
Right.
And it's done.
Yeah, because he gets three life sentences, one for each of his crimes. And several of the articles you can read that he finally, like, he gets to speak, and they talk about how he's trembling and he looks upset. Of course he is now.
Well, yeah, he's upset because he's going to prison.
Yeah, but I think the irony of everything he went through for me is that now he is a public figure.
Yeah.
He finally got what he wanted, just not the way he thought it was going to be. Nobody's going to like your orange jumpsuit selfies or your prison ramen burritos.
Yeah. Prison spread.
Yeah. He's not going to be, and I believe he can't also, I think I read somewhere that he can't have any social media while he's incarcerated.
That would be good. And I know that like we talked about earlier, there was a lot of articles that talked about this case. And then you also have to factor in that he was a student at Oklahoma University, OU.
Yeah. And
so there was a lot of student-based newspapers in that whole surrounding area for colleges that were picking up that story,
right,
and pushing the content out. And I went back over and looked at what I thought was a arrest affidavit with information in it. And I'm almost certain at this point now that whole arrest affidavit was fabricated.
Oh my God.
And it was not real. It was someone that was in. That's one of the things about making a podcast when you're looking at information is clickbait.
So much
that people are trying to get people to read their story over another story. And you believe to yourself that the information is real because it has sources. Actually, now that I think about this, I have something funny I want to tell you.
Okay.
And I forgot to tell you this. I'll just tell everybody. So I was going to talk about later, but we have our we have all our episodes on YouTube now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I had set up the YouTube page several years ago. I just never included the RSS feed or the description to actually pull the content and get it over. So whenever we decided we were coming back, and I was like, we talked about it and we're going to push it to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go to get everything set up, and YouTube's like, hey, there's already an account that exists with this name. So I type in my password, boom, it pops up. I'm like, perfect. Now all I got to do is add the RSS feed, and then I will, it'll just pull all the content to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, we're done. So I add the RSS feed, I upload it. YouTube contacts me and says I violated their terms of service and the page has a strike against it. And I was like, what? Like, I already put the description of what it was.
Right.
I already put that it was not suitable for children. I put all the parameters in place that I thought would safeguard us. And then I go back and look, and it says that I violated one of their sexual content acts.
Really?
Yeah. And so I go in, and then it says what episode it is specifically. Then I go back to the episode into the show notes where I sourced all of the information that I had.
Uh-huh.
And I individually took those sources out and pasted them into a search engine. All of them came up, what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Then I thought to myself, well, I put them in a search engine, but I didn't put them in the URL bar, the top bar. So I posted it in there, and it was not what it said it was.
Oh my goodness.
So and this is what I wanted to, this was my point, is you may think you're looking at something that is credible, but in fact, when I put it in a search bar, it brought up the actual case
mm-hmm.
that it was supposed to. If you pasted it into a different area, it came up with a website with some adult content
mm-hmm.
on it. And so I was like, well, bingo.
Yep.
There's where I got hit from. So I wrote them a little reply that said that I apologize for that.
Yeah.
I obviously did not mean to do that.
Yeah. And even people that are casual along the same lines, but not quite the same as to what point you're making, is that even if you're a casual true crimer, you're into murder and stuff, you can never just read one article anymore.
No.
You have to read several. And it's like, I wouldn't even call it fact checking, because you don't know. You're just trying to see if they all say the similar things, because there's so many different articles written by so many different people, and so many podcasts that may have already covered the topic that you're looking into. The first page on your Google search or your search engine, whichever one you're using, is what people have already done, what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So you can't find just the case. It's so funny is that growing up, like in high school, they're like, don't use Wikipedia. Can't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia can't. But Wikipedia is sadly one of the fastest ways to locate at least some of the information that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And then you could bounce it off of other articles that you're reading and things like that. But the amount of time it takes feels like, even though we have the most access to information we've ever had available at your fingertips, the human race has ever known, it feels like the time to get the facts that you want is increasing, because you have to wade through all the bull honky first.
Yes.
Yes.
And I honestly believe that the arrest affidavit that I looked at was AI generated.
Wow.
After I
son of a gun.
After I went back and started looking into it, it looked legit. And that's one of the problems, like just exactly what you're saying. In a time and age when we have the most amount of information and technology, you think we'd be able to get and learn things faster, and it's actually not true.
Yeah, we're starting to get further away from that, because we have to wade through the muck to find what you're looking for. And then when you find it, you got to bounce it off. So I know there's probably some people that are listening that can get a chuckle out of that, because we're all dealing with it in our own ways. You're like, oh, what's this case? What is a factoid about this? Let me try to find it. 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You might even take a break, come back 40 minutes before you find the piece of information you're trying to believe is true.
Yep.
Yes.
So we are dealing with that, and that one actually came back and bit me pretty hard. And so I'm not upset that it happened because it's one of those deals where we were talking about coming back will be a little bit rusty. And for me, it was, I looked at it as less is more.
Mm-hmm.
If the least amount of information I knew about it where I could still get by on, I thought would be beneficial because I just talked too much.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that ended up not being the case because it came back and bit me. But I'm okay with that because we get it worked out, and we're always honest with you guys about when we find something that if there's a discrepancy somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. That's transparency is very important to us.
Yeah, and I hope everybody understands that when you're, just as Mike explained, when you're trying to do this, you gotta dig just through massive weeds to get what you're looking for, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with doing that. And in my opinion, I'm gonna change up my model a little bit as far as my outline goes, because I changed my whole outline for the last episode that we removed.
Yeah,
trying to change it to something I thought would work better, and it didn't work. And so I'm going to change it again.
Yeah, and I think for what it's worth going forward, I think your idea of having a more, let's call it skeletal outline, where you're just talking about the facts of the case, and then we break it down, like we do in the part 2, I think is actually good. So you're going to see a shorter first episode.
Yeah. No more of the hour 15, 45 minutes even of the first episode. We want to go back to how we originally set it up, to where it was supposed to be 20 or 30 minutes max, where you got the details of the case, and then we break it down.
Yeah. And then you have to listen to us rattle on and crack wise.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good stuff. I think, and as rusty as I felt when we started, I feel like that went really well.
I feel good right now.
That felt good.
I was a little bit, like I said, I was a little bit nervous when we first started, but now I'm back into the groove, and that's what I think. These first couple of episodes now are done. We're back in the saddle, and like I said, we're gonna do a little bit different outline. I'm gonna change my outline to avoid this scenario that happened to me on the last episode. But like I said, you can't. No one's bound to thousand. You can't come out and be perfect. But we thank you guys for sticking around and listening to us. I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up as far as this episode goes. If you guys want to reach out to us, always remember we have the social medias, we have the Facebooks, we have the Instagram, and we have a X account, a Twitter account. I've seen zero activity on that page ever. So if you're looking for us on Facebook, we're at The Murder Project, and also on Instagram, we're at The Murder Project. And if you want to reach out to us and send us an email, you can email us at contact@themurderproject.com. And as always, Mike or myself will get back to you. We respond to every single message that we get. If you're listening to us on any of the platforms, Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeart, now YouTube, go on there, subscribe to the show. If there's an availability, hit that 5 stars, because
5 stars.
It puts us out. It's in the algorithms. We got to get it. We got to get it out there. So if all of you guys would do that, if you have the chance, our YouTube page is up and running. It is live. Currently, at the time of this recording, we have 5 subscribers.
Oh, man.
Let's go ahead and bump those rookie numbers.
Our rookie numbers.
We need to bump those up. So if you are listening to the show, if you wouldn't mind, go over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button, tap the bell so you always know when we upload content. You can start listening to it on YouTube if you want, or stay with your previous platform.
Right.
We don't have a problem with that. Just go on there and make sure you're subscribed to the show, and please leave us a review. Hit the 5 stars. It helps us out so much.
Right on. Yeah, please do.
So we are going to wrap things up for this episode. We thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to us. But before we go, always remember, head up,
eyes up,
and stay alive.